Welcome back to Ridgeview High School's Modern U.S. History Project. I'm Superintendent John Weavers. I just wanted to thank everyone for all the wonderful feedback with this project. Our students have done a fantastic job with the interviews. I'm proud of them for being brave enough to try something so different. You all make it look so easy. Thank you for joining us again. I hope you enjoy our third episode.
This is Pascuel Huerta's interview with Rick Williams. Rick's draft number was 67, so he was pretty sure that he would have been drafted, so he chose to enlist instead. That way, the wedding announcements that he and his fiancée had sent out would ensure that he was present for the wedding. That's just one of the stories that you'll hear Mr. Williams share in Pascuel's interview.
My name is Pascuel Huerta. I am a junior at Ridgeview High School. On February 21st, 2018, I had the honor of interviewing Rick Williams for our Modern U.S. History class project. Thank you for tuning in to our interview.
Rick Williams, I joined the military when I was 19, and I live here in Holstein. I was in the Army.
All right. Well, thank you for coming in.
Gotcha.
So I guess my first question is, when were you drafted or when did you enlist?
I wasn't drafted. I actually enlisted. My draft number was 67 when they had started doing the lottery. And I was out of high school. My wife was a senior. My wife now was a senior at that time. And we knew that it was pretty much inevitable at that time that the service was going to come get me. So we had made plans to get married. Found out that I was going to be drafted and gone before the wedding date. So I went and enlisted, which gave me a 3-month delay before I had to go in, so I could be, we had the announcements and everything out. We had to make sure, it'd be nice if I was there.
Yeah.
So I was in for 3 years. I was a regular Army instead of a draftee.
Oh, wow. Okay. Where did you serve during the war and what was that like?
Well, I took basic in Fort Lewis, Washington. I was there for 8 weeks, and then I spent another 16 weeks in Fort Lee, Virginia, taking advanced training. After that, I got my orders to go to Vietnam.
And how did you personally feel about the war?
It was something that we were in it, so I guess, being brought up by 2 ex-Marines, I kind of thought, do what I was called on to do.
Right. And how did you entertain yourself abroad?
They kept us pretty busy. We worked 7 days a week, so there wasn't, it just really, every day was just another day. We got up, we went to work, we did what we had to do. And as far as entertainment, I read a lot of books.
What was one of your most memorable experiences?
Well, actually, of course, the most memorable thing was getting out of there and coming home. There was, that's what went on over there. We were in a helicopter unit, so we did a lot of flying. I spent a lot of time in the air. I wasn't actually, out in the bush supporting the troops so much, but I was in the repair part of the operation, so I flew all over Vietnam getting parts, so I saw an awful lot of the country.
Do you remember what it was like arriving in Vietnam?
Yes, the first thing you remember when you get off the plane, of course I landed in Cam Ranh Bay, and actually Cam Ranh Bay is one that the military actually built up they dug sand out of the harbor in order to make a harbor for their ships, and then they piled the sand up, and then they thought that was a good place for an Army base, so that's where they put the base at. Sand everywhere, and the first thing you notice when you get off the plane is the smell. You open the door of the plane and the smell just kind of is overwhelming. I found out within a day or so what the smell was.
Was it like that Agent Orange or something like that?
Well, no, the smell actually came from, it was the facilities and the way they disposed of waste. They used 55-gallon drums cut in half, set underneath, kind of like the outhouse type thing.
Oh.
And every morning they would take the tubs out and they'd pour diesel fuel on top of them and light it on fire to get rid of it. And it was, there was, you could see the little puffs of black smoke coming up all over from the burning of the human waste.
Oh. Okay. What was the type of gear or food you had?
Food was good. Of course, it was better. We spent a short period of time when we were with the Air Force, and they had real plates and real silverware. Ours was plastic and paper. The staple was roast beef. We had roast beef for breakfast, we had roast beef for dinner, we had roast beef for supper, which is kind of ironic because it was always my favorite meal. I tried to get home for when my son was born, and I came home for 2 weeks, and the first meal that my wife fixed for me was roast beef, and my mother-in-law, she fixed roast beef, and I loved it. It was a lot better than what I got over there, but it was just kind of ironic. Anything but roast beef, but those were the first 2 meals I had when I got home.
What was it really like in Vietnam?
It was, where I wasn't, like I said, I didn't have to go out and sleep in the bushes, that type of thing. You were always on edge. You never knew when something was going to happen. The base, we had, pulled guard duty. We were right on the edge of the base, so we, could look out and see the Vietnamese working in the fields and stuff. It was kind of tranquil, really, them out there working in the field. Of course, at night things got a little bit hairy. Once in a while they'd like to sneak up and lob some mortars in, just enough to keep us awake. They'd shoot some mortars in, and wherever they'd hit, and then they'd have to get us up, and we'd have to go out and sit on the perimeter half the night until they decided they were done playing, and then we could go back and go to bed for a while. That happened, every week, 10 days.
Can you describe how you felt coming back home from war?
I was just grateful to be home. My son was born while I was over there. So when I see even today those pictures of the reunions, it kind of brings a tear to my eye because I experienced that, getting off the plane, seeing my wife I hadn't seen for a while, and first time I saw my son. That was once we got back here. You hear a lot about, the way we were treated. I came back into Seattle, and things weren't real pleasant at the Seattle airport. There were a lot of protesters there, and had a few things thrown at you because we were in uniform. But once we got on base, we were fine. And then when I left, I went into civilian clothes. So of course, my haircut was kind of a giveaway, but they wasn't quite as bad as long as I wasn't in uniform. But once we got back to the Midwest, come back to Holstein, it was, welcome back. And it was just a completely different mindset here in Iowa than what it was when you were in the cities.
How does your military experience affect your life today?
Well, it's, I am a victim of Agent Orange. I have some disabilities that were caused by it. I have some heart conditions and some cancer conditions that were caused by the Agent Orange we were exposed to over there. So I deal with those every day. But other than that, at first I was a little spooky when I first got back. We were sitting up in our apartment, and we were eating dinner, and a noon whistle went off. The whistle would go off every noon back in the day, and we were sitting there eating dinner, and the noon whistle blew, and we were a block actually from the siren. So when it went off, you definitely heard it, and I was out of the apartment, down the steps, and out the back door before I realized I was home. Just from the reaction of what I had been used to doing when I heard the whistle. Woke up in the night sometimes, but that's all faded away now.
We were curious as to know how well American soldiers got to know some of the Vietnamese people.
A lot of the media work was done. They would come in. The people that cut our hair were Vietnamese. They worked in the mess hall. They served, and did some stuff there. At the commissary, they came in and they worked. There was always the joke, they just, you go to the barber and get your hair cut, and that night he'd bring his razor in and cut your throat. It was kind of a joke we had about us because, you didn't know they did. They'd be in the base during the day. We did have, they did the cleanup and the burning that I referred to earlier. A lot of that was done by Vietnamese. We just had, somebody that supervised it. But one time they noticed that one of the guys while it was burning, was walking between the motor pool and the office and to where the helicopters were parked, and come to find out he was stepping it off and counting the paces so they could tune in with their mortars later. They caught him, and so we turned out all right on it, but he was actually pacing it off for the enemy so they could have coordinates on where to drop their mortars.
One thing that our students have learned during these interviews is about the money exchange. Rick does a great job of explaining this.
Yeah, it was kind of interesting. The money we had over there was military pay certificates, MPC. And if it was a felony, if we got caught with American money, if anybody sent us any greenbacks, we had to turn them in. It looked like monopoly money. And it was just, it was good. There was no problem of it. We could only have so much. They kind of kept track of, how much we kept and everything because the black market was so bad. So they would keep track. If, you went and bought something and you had more money than what they thought you should have, it was kind of bad. If you wanted something, you just registered it and turned it in. And to stockpile it, they liked to, at the office, kind of like a bank. And then when you decided to make that larger purchase, you could go up and they would get you the money back out, and it would justify that you had that much money. Every so often, they would have a exchange. They wouldn't tell you when it was going to happen, but they would shut everything down, and this was countrywide, and they would exchange the money. There was no place you could spend it. There was nothing you could do with it, and everything had to be turned in and exchanged for a different color. And the reason for that being, people would be hoarding it, and they weren't supposed to have it. Well, you could only exchange so much. If you had more to exchange than what you were supposed to have, it was quite a deal. And the reason that they did that is they couldn't buy weapons with pay certificates. Okay, all that was good for was crap they could buy through the exchanges. But if they would get a dollar bill, they could take that and they could go buy bullets with it. So no, you weren't allowed to have any real money.
Most of the veterans who were interviewed had fond memories of the letters from home, and especially the care packages from home. Everyone shared when they would get a care package or news from home.
I got the Advance, which was the local paper, and they, of course, back then there was Sophie that used to. She was every paper had where Sophie had coffee that week, and I think everybody in my hooch or my barracks knew who Sophie was because they would say, "Well, did Sophie have coffee this week?" And these are people from the big city. They read that small paper and they just cracked up.
In our first episode, Mark told us about sleeping outside and sleeping in rice paddies. Rick had different living quarters.
Most of the time while I was there, we spent it in hooches. They were, I don't know how big they were, but they had 8 rooms in it, 2 people per room, so there were 16 people in each hooch, and they were kind of spread out around. They weren't all, they were for a reason, and they all had sandbag barricades around them just up to the windows. So if you were on the floor, it protected you, but yet you could still open windows and get air through because there was no air conditioning. And they were just wide open, but our ingenuity, because all of the rockets and ammunition and stuff came in wooden crates. So you'd tear the crates apart, and we had them all. We'd made individual rooms, so you had a little bit of privacy. It wasn't wide open. And we had our pictures hanging on the wall.
As always, we leave you with these parting thoughts.
We're a patriotic place.
We appreciate Rick Williams sharing about his 3 years in the Army during the Vietnam War. Join us for next week's interview, which will be Kevin McGuire sharing Monsignor Kenneth Seyfried's experience.